And apologies to our friends around the world who are watching. So, what I thought I would do as a way to get moving on this, and then maybe we could even take turns reading if everybody has a copy of this book, is I'm going to read until there's a point that I want to comment, and then I'm going to stop and make my comment. And that can be anywhere from one paragraph to a couple paragraphs or even to one sentence, because Dr. Jung has layered a lot of information here um, that he's sneaked into this last chapter. If you're not attuned to it, you'll just bounce off it, or you'll read it like a novel and then forget all about it. So, any biography of myself must, I think, take account of the following reflections. It is true that they may well strike others as highly theoretical, but making theory of this sort is as much a part of me as vital a function of mine as eating and drinking. So, yes, he spent his whole life theorizing and making theory. And then we start to get into the meat of it. One, what is remarkable about Christianity is that in its system of dogma, it anticipates a metamorphosis in the divinity, a process of historic change on the other side. So, Nancy, would either you or Jerome or Nick like to take on the meaning of that sentence? Okay, it says about Christianity, it anticipates a metamorphosis in the divinity. Um, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I don't know about a metamorphosis, but certainly uh, an evolving. Now, maybe that's the same thing.
Yeah, that's what he means, I think. And he means that um, the divinity is evolving. Yeah, that's a good
Yes,
way of putting it. Um,
24/7.
24/7 and for every one of us. Okay.
Yes.
In other words, at least in Dr. Jung's world, I don't want to offend anybody else, and I don't want to jam anybody else's. I don't want to jam my beliefs and understandings down anyone else's throat. But the way I take this is that um, Christianity is changing for every one of us, because each one of us has a different understanding of what God is and how God is going to interact with us. And of course, if you're a child, um, you're taught that God is up there and he's going to take care of you like a kindly Geppetto. And a lot of people never get past uh, that kind of concept of what God might be. Uh, but um, but in my view, Dr. Jung's work shows us that that isn't what God is at all. And um, there's no being, there's no single being. Well, maybe there is a single being, but there's no single being up there that's pulling our strings and going to make sure everything goes hunky dory for us. Those more than 50 people who've gotten the coronavirus in the U.S. and died already have demonstrated God didn't save them. Uh, so,
Well, when you speak about God from a Jungian perspective, uh, it is the scientific perspective.
right.
not
So,
the metaphysical perspective.
right, the psychological perspective.
Yes.
Right. And so, from
Well,
this,
and I think that if you look at if the Christianity has already evolved and from the Old Testament to the New Testament, so it has been evolving. There are some questions by people that why did we stop all of a sudden? Have we reached the summit and the peak? So that's probably a question that's been going on, around.
right, but it seems to me that the church tried to stamp out that question for about 2,000 years. Basically they said, okay, we've got it, what God is. You don't have to worry about it. Just come to church and everything will be hunky-dory. And oh, by the way, if you believe anything else, we're going to burn you at the stake. I mean, that was the attitude.
You have to remember the hermits and the desert fathers and the mystics who were going their own way and in touch with the real God.
Yes, okay. And tell us more about that if you know, because I mean, I certainly know what Dr. Jung said in the Red Book about it, but do you know anything more about the hermits and so on?
Well, I would just say I'm referring to the contemplative orders in the Catholic Church, although there are orders in other religions and so forth. But the contemplative has one who has connected with the self in Jungian terms, and that flow is 24/7. And there is a sense in which they are in touch with God at the advanced level continuously.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that particular place of connection, there is a sense of oneness and a sense of harmony. That doesn't mean there isn't still an ego, but the ego has surrendered in a sense and now is not head of the committee.
Right. So do you think that they were trying to be like Buddhists that are just go over entirely to the self and to nirvana and just be swallowed up in the self?
I would say that they were aware that the ego could be a problem and that they had practices to bring the ego to a place. Well, I shouldn't say they brought it to a place. The self would have been working with them to bring them to the place where the ego was surrendered. Some writers, St. John of the Cross, speak of the annihilation of the ego,
Mm-hmm.
but that isn't something that was popular by any chance. But it helps to explain that if you want to connect to this eternal great flow of life, that the ego gets in the way, the intellect gets in the way. And in my own practice, I come into a place of quiet, and I have this image in myself of my intellect going to sleep.
Uh-huh.
And the flow opens up, and I am one in that space with the self, with the God image.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not far enough along yet for it to stay all the time, but I've passed the place where there's a lot of distraction, a lot of thoughts.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that it happens to all of us and we don't know it. Okay, a lot of people don't know it, and it comes down to this this secondary phrase in this sentence: a process of historic change on the other side. Now, do you have a way of referring to the other side, Nancy or Jerome?
It would, for me personally, it would be the oneness, the sense of being that myself and God are one, without separation.
Mhm. And how about you, Jerome?
Yeah, I would say it's a connection. What I call flow is the way I look at it.
Psychic energy.
Yeah, and part of what the contemplatives do is I don't see them coming out and back into the world and letting us know what they're discovering there.
Hmm.
So what I see is for the future is for us to get more involved with telling people about the experience, but don't stay
Right.
there. You have to bring it back to your community and say, this is what I've learned. It's kind of like what Dr. Farr did. He went into that particular state and came out and told us what he found.
Who's Dr. Farr?
I'm sorry, Dr. Jung. Excuse
Oh,
me.
Dr.
Dr.
Jung.
Farr is my mentor. So,
Oh,
but
okay.
he also
I,
said the
I,
same thing. Yeah.
I just wanted to add something that the Pope has recently told all the contemplative orders to open up their orders to give classes. I just went to one here at our Carmelites recently,
Hmm.
and they were teaching what we might call the secrets. They were not just teaching the surface.
Yeah.
So that is coming out right, in this year. It's
Wow.
happening all over.
Terrific. That's
Yeah,
good.
and he
Good to know.
also recognized Teilhard de Chardin, who was ousted by the church,
Hmm.
and this Pope recognized him, and this is in line with what Nancy was just saying. Now they've progressed to they're saying, hey, this guy had something, we threw him out, but now we'll welcome him back in because we need this. So this could be the evolution. A little late, but it's coming.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nick.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, no. I was just gonna say that. Yeah, I agree with everything that Nancy, Jerome, yourself has said. But I would add that that I think and I think you guys would agree that now more than ever, it's very necessary for that kind of message that people like the Desert Fathers got, for that message to be brought into the world.
Mhm.
For everyone, but especially for the younger generations, in fact, the post millennials that are growing up in basically what is a world that none of us, including myself, have grown up in before. I think it's very, very different, and
Yeah.
and it's not just as easy as for that perennial message to be brought out into the open, because okay, let me try to think of how I'm going to say this. I was watching a YouTube channel the other day, something about the coronavirus, but it's not about the virus. It's this word that the hosts were using. They were saying sense making, and that's kind of a new thing where there's a recognition that we are of that part of us that is trying to make sense of the world,
Uh-huh.
right? But when the person said that, and this is nothing to do with the person or what, I mean, I think it's good that there is such a term, even recognition of that. When the person said that, I realized that it can also be a double-edged sword, you see, because that is still the ego trying to make sense of the world. You know what I mean? And
Right.
and so it on one level it can actually be just another term for for business as usual, but at the same time it's good that um um it's good that the young generation, there is even such a word, you see, because this word implies that they understand that not everything you read in the news, not everything you experience in the world is just objective and represents the world. So that's a good thing. But
Right.
in terms of actually receiving the message of the Desert Fathers, I feel the contemplative message. I mean, you use the word annihilation. Was that St. John or something like that?
With the ego.
Yeah. So annihilation means everything, even the sense making, gets annihilated. You see, because yeah. So I just wanted to
Yeah,
put,
I mean,
put that up.
it's a question of plugging into the psychic energy, isn't it?
Correct, exactly. And
Yeah.
and yeah, so it's yeah, so all I wanted to say, sorry, was that yes, it's important the message gets brought in, but the challenges will be unique to this time.
Yeah, sure. Because
Yep.
I mean, I think it's a great innovation that young people like you are realizing, well, geez, these people that came along the last 2,000 years, they must have had something. And what was it? What was their understanding? And so by understanding what was going on, it's very helpful to then appreciate its significance, its relevance. Um, and so what I wanted to refer to was this change on the other side. And the other side for Dr. Jung was the unconscious. Okay. In other words, um, the sacred chaos, if you will, is in the unconscious. And, you know, the church fathers were afraid of the unconscious, so they were trying to tamp it down. But for example, we have this book, which we've talked about a couple times in the last couple of weeks, Sacred Chaos. And the point is that actually everything in life is chaos for us. I mean, when we're born, and the first time we see light as we emerge from the womb, you know, we go, oh my God, what's going on with me? You know, you go from unconsciousness, total unconsciousness, to, oh my God, there's light. You know, you don't even think of it that way. It's just this light hits you. And so my part of my point is that we need the logos. Okay, we need to be able to describe things, to understand things, and words are the kind of building blocks to understand a concept, abstract thought, to understand anything. But to put together a building or an automobile, you need words and pictures, and that's all logos. But none of that is alive. And so the sacred chaos is actually on the other side. It's not in the logos, because everything you see in my picture, which I've said many times, is inanimate with the exception of me. And even I am based on logos to the extent that you know, the DNA is a kind of logos that builds up, but nobody, the scientific community still cannot explain life. They don't know what that is. Okay, and so even though they know once they have life what they can do with it, and they can do a lot of experiments around it, but the reality is that they don't know why life exists. Okay, and so that's a pretty amazing idea. And so if you think of everything that isn't the logos as this divine realm where we pull certain aspects of the divine realm into us as we're educated and so on, then we can understand it in the, you know, we can make sense, as you say, Nicholas. So so that we can understand ourselves and ourselves in the context of our culture and so on. But it's still a mystery, okay, how it all works. And so the contemplatives were taking all the noise out, okay, and I guess is one way to think of it, this idea that the man of the 16th century only had the equivalent of one Sunday edition of the New York Times in his whole lifetime in terms of information coming in. You know, men and women both. They didn't learn more information than that. And suddenly, Nicholas comes along and his generation, and there's just this explosion of information. And how do you learn how to cope with that and ride in that sea of chaos, because it is chaos. And so you learn, you gain a sense of why things have worked the way they do. And the church was explaining that over the years, obviously, in terms of certain aspects of uh, certain aspects of religious thought. But I just wanted to read this one quote that Dr. Jung gave us. Let's see. It's called The Way to God. And he said, for thousands of years, the mind of man has worried about the sick soul, perhaps even earlier than it did about the sick body. The propitiation of gods, the perils of the soul and its salvation, these are not yesterday's problems. Religions are psychotherapeutic systems in the truest sense of the word, and on the grandest scale. They express the whole range of the psychic problem in mighty images. They are the avowal and recognition of the soul, and at the same time, the revelation of the soul's nature. From this universal foundation, no human soul is cut off. Only the individual consciousness that has lost its connection with the psychic totality remains caught in the illusion that the soul is a small circumscribed area, a fit subject for scientific theorizing. The loss of this great relationship is the prime evil of neurosis. And so what he's saying is that neurosis separates the ego and the self, and until you can connect them back up, somebody really can't be healthy. And a lot of what the Jungian analysts do, I think, is help people recognize their psychic energy, their flow. I think that would be a way to talk about it. And
Yeah, and just what you just read, it's the lost connection to the psyche.
right.
And that means that we need to reestablish the connection. And that relates back to what you said, the other, getting
Right.
to know the other, which is the unconscious.
The other
And,
side, right.
And the way you do that is, first of all, if you look at the history, people have had these connections and experiences through time.
Yes.
You can look back through history and you can go through all sorts of, from Greeks and all sorts of religions and practices and so forth.
Right.
And so it's entirely, they're describing a truth. And what Jung saw was these were all universal.
Right. So we can go back to,
they're archetypal.
truly. So we can go back.
You're not going to get out of it. It's here, but you need to
Right.
find it. So we got to go find it. So
Right. So that is the importance of this book, because when you look at biblical numinous experiences like Abraham seeing the lamb in the thicket and sacrificing the lamb instead of Isaac, you can imagine here's a father who has a knife, and he's taking his son up on the mountain to kill him. I'm going to kill my son because it's the tradition of our community to sacrifice your first son, your firstborn, and to show that you're committed to God. And so he was having a very traumatic experience, and that traumatic experience generated a vision. And that vision was that God was telling him that he could sacrifice a goat instead. And my friend Rabbi Stephen Fuchs, who has served as president of the World Union of Progressive Jews, wrote a book called Finding Ourselves in Biblical Narratives, which I've put on the web, on a site called Jung Guru. I'll just write that into the chat on YouTube. If you go to Jung.guru, and on there, if you look around in the books, you'll find Steve Fuchs's book. And basically what he said in that book was that the event involving Abraham basically was the end of human sacrifice in the Judeo-Christian world, that up until that time, and this was happening all over the world. I mean, if you've ever been to Mexico or Egypt or whatever, you'll find lots of human sacrifice over historically. But at least in the Abraham and Isaac story is actually the story of Abraham waking up and realizing that he doesn't have to sacrifice his son to satisfy his God. Okay, and that came through that trauma. And so the insight came from the other side, from his unconscious. So I just want to once again read, I have a book that I've marked up pretty heavily here. It's called The New God Image by Edward Edinger. In this, Dr. Jung finally became explicit about what he was talking about. And so he wrote 14 letters to theologians in the last 6 or 7 years of his life. And those have been repressed basically by the Jungian community for a very long time. 7 of them appear in volume 2 of Carl Jung Letters. So if you're enough of a Jung follower to want to go buy the second volume of his letters, you can find 7 of them there. But 7 of them only appear in volume 18 of the collected works. So you have to get pretty deep. You have to roll up your sleeves and get quite deep into Jungian study before you can get to these things. And even then, you would have to be able to pull it together. But Edinger pulled it together for us. And so there's a letter that Dr. Jung wrote to the Reverend David Cox on September 25th, 1957. And I think that's the date. Let me just double check. Yep, September 25th, 1957. And so very late in that letter, he's explaining a whole lot of things in this letter to the Reverend David Cox. But finally he says, although all this sounds as if it were a sort of theological speculation, it is in reality modern man's perplexity expressed in symbolic terms. It is the problem I so often had to deal with in treating the neuroses of intelligent patients. It can be expressed in a more scientific, psychological language. For instance, instead of using the term God, you say unconscious. Instead of Christ, self. Instead of incarnation, integration of the unconscious. Instead of salvation or redemption, individuation. And instead of crucifixion or sacrifice on the cross, realization of the 4 functions or wholeness. I think it is no disadvantage to religious tradition if we can see how far it coincides with psychological experience. On the contrary, it seems to me a most welcome aid in understanding religious tradition. So that's one of my favorite Jungian quotes of all time. But what it alerted me to is the fact that there's two unconsciouses that Dr. Jung is talking about. One is the individual unconscious, which is the self. It's that part of yourself that really runs the show for you, because none of us know what we'll be doing even 2 minutes from now. Okay, and our self will tell us what to do when we get two more minutes down the road. And so we have this deep unconscious within ourselves that actually run our lives. I mean, and then there's the collective unconscious. And so you can see it. If you understand what Dr. Jung is talking about, you can see it in, driving down the highway. In, the easiest way to see it, I guess, is night. I realized this. I had this aha moment when I was driving from Boston to Annapolis one time, and I saw the taillights ahead of me and the headlights coming toward me, and that's all you can see overnight. And I realized that, the traffic just is like on rails, and we're all unconscious about all of the things that go in to make that a safe trip. Okay, in other words, we don't know how good of a driver people are. We don't know whether their car is well maintained. We don't know if they have a good car. We don't know if the local governments have set the right traffic rules. We don't know if the local governments have maintained the highway properly. And so we're totally reliant on all these things that we're unconscious of. And if we can sit down and make a list of all the things we're unconscious of, but we're totally dependent upon that. And, the thing that Dr. Edinger pointed out to me, which I finally got it, is that when you pray, you're really praying, first of all, to your self, to your God image. And so the Lord's Prayer is really 7 petitions to your own unconscious. And you really can't have any direct influence on the collective unconscious. I mean, yes, a very minuscule one, but the prayer that needs to be going out to the collective unconscious is kind of a hope that everybody has done their stuff, that people have blown up their tires properly and know how to drive, and they're not drunk and that sort of thing. And so the prayer is, I pray that everybody's done their stuff, but the God power is beyond our control. So when we have, for example, the coronavirus, did anybody know that Trump had fired all the epidemiologists at CDC? No, we don't know it until all of a sudden we have an epidemic and we have no doctors, and they haven't been watching the problem as it's coming. And so, God is rightfully to be feared. I mean, only 2 weeks ago, our president was saying, well, we only have 15 cases, and maybe in a couple of days we'll have 0. And he was saying that 2 weeks ago. And now we're worried about overrunning the healthcare system. And so that's sacred chaos right there. That's what that is. Anyway, I'll shut up and let you all comment. We've gotten through one sentence, but anyway. Jerome, do you want to comment?
On which sentence, I think. Anyway,
I'm still on the sentence that ends with other side.
A metamorphosis of the divinity or something like that. So
yeah.
When Jung was rewording those statements that you read from changing individuation, to
Right.
translate it from the Bible. He's establishing a baseline for his psychology
Precisely.
that would apply not only to religion, but in the Christianity terms, but also to other terms. He was sorting this out in his head. Like,
Right.
how can I present this to reach a wide number of people with different beliefs?
Yeah. So that people
Because
can understand what it
psychology,
means.
yeah, because psychology, if you're a psychologist, you look at the person's history and his culture and his beliefs and how all these affect his current state.
Right.
And so you have to have a framework, and you can't really use the religious framework because that's not what he was doing.
Well,
But I think it's very helpful for us to look at it through his lens that he established, and we can see the difference that way.
right.
Normally,
And-
if you learn one thing, you'll never know the difference unless you learn the difference.
right. And so
Separate it and say, "Oh, I see now the difference."
yeah, so you can see it in someone like Paul Vanderklay, who, he was taught a certain way based on his not only his upbringing, because his father and grandfather were both pastors, but by his theological training, that this is what we talk about. And the other day he said that um, Jung, what he was told about Jung was, that's a red flag, don't go there. And so why is it a red flag? Well, it's a red flag because Christianity has been presented in a certain way. And if you change that even a little bit, that means everything has to be rethought. And that's the point. That's what Dr. Jung himself said, that it must be possible to rethink these things in the context of modern categories of understanding. That's the point.
Yeah, we have to update our assumptions, in other words, that we've made
Right.
before, and that's part of what we're still talking about, the metamorphosis and evolution.
Right.
We still need to present this in terms that we modern day people can understand, even
Right.
though they're deep. I mean, they're deep, archetypal, it's the depths coming forth.
Surely.
But we need to update it so people can understand it in modern times. And as Nancy says, we get back into the contemplative, not being going out into the woods and contemplating like that. You can integrate that with your life
Right.
as a goal. And
Right.
in the Indian cultures, they don't even they're able to integrate that with their ongoing life as they go on. So they do a little of this. It's a balance, in other words.
Yeah. Right. And in the logos, one of the functions of logos is there's always discernment. That's what we're about in the logos, is discerning differences between this and that. And so once Luther discerned that there was, something rotten in the Christian church, and he wanted to fix it, and so he sliced and diced. But as soon as he sliced and diced, then it got sliced and diced again and again and again, to the point where today there's more than 400 denominations on the Protestant side, and about 5, I guess, on the Catholic side. And so what we have to do now is wake up and say, oh my God, we have to stop this slicing and dicing. I mean, even in his interview with me, he was differentiating the Christian Reformed Church from the Reformed Church in America. And, he says, oh, you don't have to care about that. Well, he shouldn't be caring about it either, but he does. And because he's taught to care about it. And so what we need to do is for all denominations to turn around and stop slicing and dicing and start sewing the fabric back together again, to include all religions, it seems to me. Yeah. So, okay.
Nancy?
Nancy, you want to? You're looking. Nancy's looking antsy. So.
Well, I was just thinking it would be more likely for something new to come forth and spread like the coronavirus. When the Christian religion at a certain point took off and spread so much that for a long, long time we dated our years before Christ and after Christ.
Right.
So
Well, we still do.
well, now it's BCE and
Yeah. Well, we changed the
CE and
names, but it doesn't change the fact.
that's true. But I would just, Jesus said, you can't put new wine into old wineskins. And I just have a feeling that something new will have to break forth and be caught up like a virus.
Well, and we may, the virus may be the thing to do it. It could well be,
Could be.
surprisingly, because I think it's making a lot of people around the world rethink their lives and how they work together and that sort of thing.
Now, one thing that I've read recently about the contemplative way is that now the Desert Fathers were basically hermits in caves.
Mhm.
And if someone came to one of them and said, teach me this path, one of them might say, well, here's what I do that or do something else. But there was a transmission of experience and practice.
Right.
And they were free to choose that or something else, try something else. So they were all emerging themselves in their relationship with God.
Right.
And what I'm hearing today is that Christianity, or I don't know about other religions, will be propagated one-on-one rather than the church being what evangelizes or teaches. It will be a one-on-one kind of experience. Here's what I do, try that or something else.
Well, that's right. And I mean, in essence, that's what Dr. Jung was doing. That's basically what the Red Book is. Okay, it's his exegesis of this is what I do. Okay, this is what I do. This is what I did, and he knew that in his time nobody would understand it, so he left it unpublished, and so now we have a few people coming along or have come along, and Sonu Shamdasani was the most notable of those because he's the editor of the Red Book, and so he basically said, here was Dr. Jung's way, and Dr. Jung specifically said, this is my way, it's not your way. How would I teach you? I can't teach you. And the punchline of Liber Secundus is, this is the way. Or it's well, there's two sentences. Well, actually, I can go back a little further. He says, so he says, you should be the vessel and womb of life. Therefore, I shall purify you. The touchstone is being alone with oneself. This is the way. Okay, so he said that. That's the very last thing that he put in the Red Book. And
If I, oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead, Nicholas.
Oh, if I could just add on to Nancy's point, because she mentioned something about if someone went down to like one of those hermits and he will say like, here's what I do, you can try something else. I just wanted to add on that, okay, because I've been thinking about what oral transmission actually means, and what being in the presence of one of these people, like what it could actually mean. And I think there is also a dimension of it where it just takes the presence of being there with a person for such a hermit, let's just call him a hermit, to kind of feel into it / know what needs to be said to this other person, and that dimension just can't be captured in language. You see, we might have a recording of what actually transpired even, but whatever transpired was unique to that situation in ways that the hermit himself might not even know, you see.
Yes,
That means
correct.
it's a spontaneous, okay, actually it's kind of like, if I could bring it to Jung, it's kind of like that famous story of the scarab flying in.
Yes.
When that happened, Jung actually, the analysis was actually at a plateau. It was actually stalling, and he knew that he just had to wait it out, so to speak. And when the beetle, the scarab came, I mean, Jung didn't plan that for sure, but when it tapped on the window, and he was actually hit by the experience himself.
Yes.
And then he showed her, and as a unit, that's the important thing. As a unit, analyst and analysand, they both, it was a spontaneous act. So I just wanted to point out that there is that dimension of coming together in presence, and I don't know if that's what oral teaching means, but I just feel that it's close. It should be closer, since oral teaching can't just be capturing the language of what transpired into a recording. But that being said, I do believe that books such as the Red Book, or even the Bible for that matter, let's just call them holy books, transmissions, right? I do believe that there's this other dimension of, when it comes to these books, of them being, I mean, why do we call them holy? I feel it's because okay, to keep it short, these books are animated. And once they are animated, they actually transcend the author. And in that sense, you don't know where and when, but if it comes into contact with another person at the right time in the person's life, then a transmission will also happen, this time without the presence of, the hermit, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, and then they bring their perspective into it and bring it back to life in a slightly different way.
Yes, exactly.
Perhaps. Yeah, I mean, the end of a section called The Way of What Is to Come, Jung said, and so I'm in the Red Book now, and I'm on page 125 of the Reader's Edition. He says, "Believe me, it is no teaching and no instruction that I give you. On what basis should I presume to teach you? I give you news of the way of this man, but not of your own way. My path is not your path. Therefore, I cannot teach. The way is within us, but not in God's, nor in teachings, nor in laws. Within us is the way, the truth, and the life. Woe betide those who live by the way of examples. Life is not with them. If you live according to an example, you thus live the life of that example. But you should live your own life. But who should live your own life if not yourself? So live yourselves. The signposts have fallen down. Unblazed trails lie before us. Do not be greedy to gobble up the fruits of foreign fields. Do you not know that you yourselves are the fertile acre which bears everything that avails you? Yet who today knows this? Who knows the way to the eternally fruitful climes of the soul? You seek the way through mere appearances. You study books and give ear to all kinds of opinion. That is good. What is the good of all that? There is only one way, and that is your way. You seek the path. I warn you away from mine. I warn you away from my own. I can also be mine can be also the wrong way for you. May each go his own way. I will be no savior, no lawgiver, no master teacher unto you. You are no longer little children. Giving laws, bettering, making things easier has all become wrong and evil. May each one seek out his own way. The way leads to mutual love and community. Men will come to see and feel the similarity and commonality of their ways. Laws and teachings held in common compel people to solitude so that they may escape the pressure of undesirable contact. But solitude makes people hostile and venomous. Therefore, give people dignity and let each of them stand apart so that each may find his own fellowship and love it. Power stands against power, contempt against contempt, love against love. Give humanity dignity and trust that life will find the better way. The one eye of the Godhead is blind, the one ear of the Godhead is deaf. The order of its being is crossed by chaos. So be patient with the crippledness of the world and do not overvalue its consummate beauty. So that's how he finished the first chapter, basically, of the Red Book.
Well, I think that's important because what you just said. We need to find your own path, and each path is unique to you.
Right.
Now, you can, as Nick said, you can go to a guru or somebody in a cave, and there is a transmission, and you can experience that
Right.
essence that he's putting out. I mean, that's just a scientific fact to me because I've done
Sure.
that many times.
And that's what we're doing here, too.
Yeah. But at the same time, you need to not be dependent on him because your path is different. And you need to
Precisely.
find a way to get in the same condition he's in, but not by depending on him. And that's where the gurus and the followers get mixed up. You end up with a lot of followers who never get to that state because they're dependent upon receiving the guru. But the guru should really only point a direction. So here's the experience, but then after that, point the direction to the. And different personality types have different development needs.
Yeah. There are a couple of beautiful quotes in this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And it's in the essay that begins the series, which now has 4 volumes. The very first essay is that of Thomas Arst, and he highlights a passage from one of the 14 letters that I mentioned. It's a letter to the Reverend Morton T. Kelsey, dated 3 May 1958. And Jung is saying, we are still looking back to the Pentecostal events in a dazed way instead of looking forward to the goal the Spirit is leading us to. Therefore, mankind is wholly unprepared for the things to come. Man is compelled by divine forces to go forward to increasing consciousness and cognition, developing further and further away from his religious background because he does not understand it anymore. His religious teachers and leaders are still hypnotized by the beginnings of a then new eon of consciousness instead of understanding them and their implications. What one once called the Holy Ghost is an impelling force, creating wider consciousness and responsibility, and thus enriched cognition. The real history of the world seems to be the progressive incarnation of the deity. And what he means by that is the incarnation of the deity in each one of us. That's what he's talking about. And so a couple pages later, Dr. Arst talks about creating your own church. He says, your cathedral, one's own church as an ecclesia spiritualis, this is the pressing issue today, according to Jung. He's basically saying that we should all create our own red book. He says, we are in a period of turbulent transitions in an interim of history. However, just how postmodern radical plurality and incarnatio continua are entangled with each other remain a mystery. Perhaps this logical contradiction is the sign of a deeper truth. Even if it took centuries, as Jung suspected, before the new God image would constitute itself, the new collective myth already is delineated, and the individual consequently called upon to actively contribute to the foundation of a new religion in the form of an invisible church, as this is described in a dream and during an ensuing talk of Max Zeller with Jung himself. Quote, and this is Max Zeller's dream now. A temple of vast dimensions was in the process of being built. As far as I could see ahead, behind, right, and left, there were incredible numbers of people building on gigantic pillars. I too was building on a pillar. The whole building process was in its very first beginnings, but the foundation was already there, and the rest of the building was starting to go up. And I and many others were working on it. And so Jung responded to this dream. Jung said, yes, you know, that is the temple we all build on. We don't know the people because, believe me, they build in India and China and in Russia and all over the world. That is the new religion. You know how long it will take until it is built? I said, how should I know? Do you know? And he said, I know. I asked how long it will take. He said, about 600 years. Where do you know this from? I asked. He said, from dreams, from other people's dreams, and from my own. This new religion will come together as far as we can see. So anyway, so the point is that we're not going to build a religion on a Wikipedia page, but it is going to emerge in an evolutionary kind of way. And so any other thoughts, Nancy? So Maria Adventure says, hello, Skip, Jerome, Nancy, Nick. I'm Marie. Nice to see you. Maria's.
Sorry, Skip. Where was that from? The part you just read about the.
Yeah, it's in an essay by Thomas Arsch.
Oh, okay. Got it. Thanks.
Okay, so it's in volume 1 of Jung's Red Book for Our Time.
Got it. I might have read that. Yep.
Yeah.
Thomas Arzt. Yep.
And that's a profound essay, a truly profound essay. So anything else, Jerome, before we go on to the next sentence?
No, other than I ordered volume 4 of that session. Yeah, so we'll see when that comes. But I'd recommend people take a look at those for there's 3 volumes so far.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
it's each Jungian has commented from a different discipline about Jung's Red Book for Our Times.
Right.
And for our times is a good definition for our times. And it's very helpful to read these different perspectives, because we all have a different perspective, and it's interesting to read about these. That's how we learn. Right.
And it shows how the Red Book itself is truly an uncut diamond, that each one of these Jungian analysts could cut off another facet and polish it up and show it to us in different ways, and that's very, very powerful. So it's a very exciting thing. So
yeah, and it's like building that temple. We're providing our facets as we build the temple, each one of us, and if we can share that here, is part of what this is about, and getting together. So
yeah, and so Mink Stoll says here, what's the difference between For Our Time and Liber Novus? Okay, well, that's a complicated question to answer. Okay, so our time would be the 21st century, which many intellectuals call postmodern. I must say that I never used the term postmodern until I was studying actually this series. I never even heard anybody use the term. Apparently, it's used fairly often in academia, but I've been out of academia for more than 40 years, so I never heard that before. And so what they mean by our time, the postmodern time, is a time when we have extreme diversity, okay? And so we could think of it as the United States, where we are so diverse. It's not, we can no longer say that we're a Christian country, but we also can't say we're a Jewish country, and we can't say we're a Muslim country, and we can't say we're a Hindu country, because we're all of these things, and etc. And Dr. Arst had a funny way of describing it. If I can find it, I'm not sure I can find it.
well, Liber Novus means the new book.
Yeah, it means new book, and
remember when Dr. Jung wrote that, it was during his time, which was, let's see, it would be how many years ago? 20 years, 60, 70, 80, 90. He's been dead, what, 40 years, 50 years?
Almost 60 now.
60 years, and he wrote that back in before that, so it's almost 100 years old.
Yeah, he was writing on it 100 years ago, definitely. Yeah, and I resist. I find myself resistant to the idea of Liber Novus, which it's not clear whether it actually appears on the spine of the book, the actual book, or not. I think it does not. And the reason I think that is because I saw a picture of it without Liber Novus on it. But if anything, I do not think that Dr. Jung, when he was using this as basically a scrapbook for his creations, I don't think he had the arrogance to suggest that this is like a New Testament. Okay, so I don't refer to this book as Liber Novus, even though many do, and I believe that Liber Novus was probably put on the spine, if it exists on the spine, by the publisher of the blank book. I don't believe it was. I don't believe that Dr. Jung was so prideful that he would have suggested this book is like a New Testament. And especially not when he was beginning, when he first got this book. He wouldn't have had that idea. And
I don't know, and he made apologies, and just what you just read, that he said that's his journey, a record.
Well, that's right. He made it clear that it...
And not to take it as your journey.
Right.
So you know, you look at that fact. But anyway, that's the translation is new book. But
Right.
yeah.
So Dr. Arst described postmodern society here, which is half a page. So I'll share that with you. He said, well, he's quoting somebody here, but he says, Lower Bavarian market towns, rural villages in the Eifel. He's German, so he's referring to German places. Small towns in Holstein are populating themselves with figures that nobody would have considered imaginable just 30 years ago. Golf-playing butchers, wives imported from Thailand, undercover intelligence officers in allotment gardens, Turkish mullahs, female pharmacists in Nicaragua committees, Mercedes-Benz driving vagabonds, anti-authoritarians with organic gardens, gun-collecting tax officers, farmers breeding peacocks, militant lesbians, Tamil ice cream vendors, classical philologists trading commodity futures, mercenaries on home leave, extremist animal rights activists, cocaine dealers with tanning salons, dominatrices with customers from top management, computer freaks commuting between California databases and Hessian wildlife reserve parks, carpenters delivering doors made of gold to Saudi Arabia, art forgers, Karl May scholars, bodyguards, jazz experts, palliative care physicians, and porn producers, the loners and village idiots, weirdos and misfits, all have been replaced by the mediocre deviant, who does not even stick out anymore among the millions of his ilk. So we're all mediocre deviants, I think. But I mean, that's basically what we're facing in this time, this postmodern time, where everything is all mixed up. And of course, the United States has been like that for 400 years. I mean, you can read Russell Shuto's book, Island at the Center of the World, which is about Manhattan and the Dutch settlement in Manhattan in the 16th century, 17th century. And, you know, he's describing Manhattan Island even then. Okay, the United States has always been that way. But it's the churn, you know, it's all the ingredients churned in there that gradually has built a stronger and stronger country here. And so we force out the impurities in our society. It's painful, but as long as we don't change it, we're going to continue to be stronger and stronger as a country. It's like tempering steel, as I often say.
Well,
And so,
not to diminish other countries. There are other countries that do just as well as we do in terms of putting it together. So
right, and
we do have a global audience here. So
yeah, and notwithstanding the fact that that's correct, and notwithstanding the fact that we have all these differences, we also, you know, it works. I mean, even when we go wipe out the toilet paper aisle, my wife brought back a photograph of our toilet paper aisle from our local grocery store, and it's completely empty. But you know, we all do that. It's not just, you know, it's not just this group or that group or whatever. And
yeah, I heard it gets that fear gets down to the instinctual level and basic needs. So it's food and you know what. So
food and toilet paper, man, we got our priorities straight.
yeah.
Okay, so someone asked what book was I reading from, and so I was reading from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Volume 1. Okay, Volume 1, which has Dr. R's essay as the very first essay in the book, and it's a profound essay, so I urge you to take a look at that. Let's see what else we've got here. So Minksville says, is for our time a different version? Yep, well, there's always churn. Jeff Hatfield, for our time, is a collection of essays about the Red Book, yes. And this, Marie says, this modern time, younger people easily get offended and self-declared oppressed. And once Nick gets connected up here, we're going to ask Nick whether he agrees with that. Nick, do you feel oppressed? Can't hear you, sir. Okay. I was watching some random YouTube videos. Public schools, some of them can't even pinpoint countries on the map. Boy, that's for sure. I have sort of been shocked by that. At one point, even 30 years ago, I remember traveling near Philadelphia, an area that I lived in when I was in junior high school, called Plymouth Whitemarsh area. There's a high school there. And I got turned around myself in the new construction in that part of the world. So I stopped to ask for help in a gas station, which is the traditional way we always did it when I was was a little kid. You'd stop at the gas station and ask for directions. But what I found is that modern people have no clue where they are in the world, at least in the United States. Very few people really have an idea of where they are in the world and what that means. So Art is with us. Good to see you, Art. But I do think that a lot of European countries and Middle Eastern countries, people are much more awake to what's going on in the world than the Americans are. We're oblivious for the most part. Let's see.
But for some, that might be true. But at the same time, for some people outside America, America is what's going on in the world.
Yeah, I mean, everybody looks to the United States. Even, my wife and I stopped watching cable news in the morning because it was all just politics. And so we started to record every day the BBC news that comes in at 6 in the morning, and the NHK, which is the Japanese news that comes in the morning. And you really see it now that, these commentators are basically referring to our president as if he's the president of the world. That it's certainly the way that perception is, even from the BBC, which is really surprising.
Yeah, I like the BBC rather than our news, but they seem to be more fair or accurate about it than.
Well, they're more complete.
Yeah, they're more complete. It's not one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so.
Right. So Jeff Hatfield says that he remembers sitting in class and memorizing states and countries because he couldn't pay attention to the teachers. That's public schools in the late 90s for you. Yeah, I suppose so. Now everybody can learn on their own through the internet. I mean, I just love what is it? TED Talk where this fellow had put a PC in an alcove in Chennai, India, Madras, in Chennai, and he put a a fairly decent little PC in there, and it had a modem, and he left it there for 2 months just to see what would happen. This is probably now 20 years old or so, I'd say. And he said that when he came back 2 months later, this 8-year-old comes up to him and he says, "We need a faster modem." So the 8-year-olds are already teaching themselves. And I know that that's happening in Pakistan also, because I know a friend of mine is doing it. Okay,
Yeah,
so
and they picked that up by themselves. They self-taught themselves just
yes,
by playing around with the computer that the guy had left,
precisely.
and at that age they learned to do that. So it's amazing what happens. The problem today is we're emphasizing the STEM courses to people, and we've cut out a lot of the arts and music, and
Well,
we've
that's a big problem.
and that's what we're talking about here, is our connection
With
to
the
the other,
sacred,
in the
right, to the
sacred,
sacred chaos.
and that's where
Right.
it is. And so, but we're teaching uh, in other words, to be successful, you're going to have to do the logos bit. If you don't, you're not going to have a job.
Right.
So that's kind of what the theory is in terms of education, but we really need to get more of that, a balance, in other words.
Yeah. So the point is, everything that you can see in this picture behind me or behind Jerome, it's all dead. I mean, yes, we have to have people that know how to make it all, and that's all logos. But once it's made, we have to put life into it, and life comes from creativity. And if we cut people off from creativity by not teaching them art or not teaching them music, we've really basically cut off one of our arms. Maybe it's our left arm if we're right-handed, but it's still an arm. Um, and so Marie says art and music is the connection to the sacred. Absolutely. And that's why everybody likes music. That's why good musicians are appreciated so much in our culture, because that is a connection to the unconscious. Okay. So we've gotten through one sentence. Let's see if we can get through the rest of this paragraph. I'm not sure. So there's a process of historic change on the other side. That's the end of that sentence. Then it does this in the form of the new myth of dissension in heaven, first alluded to in the creation myth, in which a serpent-like antagonist of the creator appears and lures men to disobedience by the promise of increased conscious knowledge, sciente bonum et malum, science of good and evil. The second allusion is to the fall of the angels, a premature invasion of the human world by unconscious contents. The angels are a strange genus. They are precisely what they are and cannot be anything else. They are in themselves soulless beings who represent nothing but the thoughts and intuitions of their Lord. Their Lord being each individual. Angels who fall then are exclusively bad angels. These release the well-known effect of inflation, which we can also observe nowadays in the megalomania of dictators. The angels beget with men a race of giants, which ends by threatening to devour mankind as is told in the book of Enoch. So the book of Enoch was written out of the Bible, as far as I know. Is that right, Jerome?
Yeah, I think it was, and I think it was either refound or something, right?
Yeah, it was found
was,
in the Nag Hammadi
yeah,
library, I think.
yeah.
And so these were early Iron Age men, mainly, who were trying to explain something that they had no clue about. But is there any of that you would like to talk about?
Well, the first part, let's see the first
the
part.
Fallen angels, and that's
I got my page.
I'm on page end of 327 and beginning of 328.
I got that. I can't get my page out.
By the way, I highly recommend the audiobook of this book, which I acquired some years ago, and I've listened to at least 15 times probably. And it's an excellent audio recording, number one. And number two, it's a good way to run the material through your mind. And if you have it on the audio or Audible app, you can actually speed it up. So in preparation for this session and the next few, I actually am listening to it in, I think, 1.5 times speeded up, because I've read it so many times. I just wanted to remind myself of what the material was in it.
Okay, what I was saying, the new myth of descension into heaven, first alluded to in the creation myth, serpent-like antagonist of the Creator, and lures man to disobedience in the promise of increased knowledge. Well, in the creation myth, if you're born, you're not conscious. You know, I mean, we have to break apart and discriminate, and that's what this is we can't tell and discriminate a difference in anything. Everything is fluid, and we have to break apart from the mother,
right?
And that's part of the progression. So that's just part of us being able to be conscious and have an ego,
right?
And to understand. So that's we need to understand that as part of the process. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do that. We would just be like an animal or fish and just be on a robot, kind of thing. But then there's a certain point in time where we have to come back. And what's happened is the ego went astray, and then you had these people that were brutal.
The race of giants.
Right.
But I mean, doesn't that happen in every teenager? In other words, when a teenager learns enough so that they know their parents are stupid, right?
Right, and then they have the rebellion phase.
Right, and they rebel.
And then after the rebellion, they're supposed to come back and realize that that maybe that we were wise.
maybe mom and dad knew something, but that doesn't usually happen to you about 30. So
35, something like that.
Yeah. So the race of giants has to get cut down, and anyway, to really understand Dr. Jung, you have to first have an ego, and hopefully it's not inflated, but it can get inflated, and I've been known to go through inflationary cycles myself, so I know about that. Okay, so the third and decisive stage of the myth, we're talking about the Christian myth now, however, is the self-realization of God in human form in fulfillment of the Old Testament idea of the divine marriage and its consequences. As early as the period of primitive Christianity, the idea of the incarnation had been refined to include the intuition of Christ within us. Thus, the unconscious wholeness penetrated into the psychic realm of inner experience, and man was made aware of all that entered into his true configuration. This was a decisive step, not only for man, but also for the Creator, who, in the eyes of those who had been delivered from darkness, cast off his dark qualities and became the summum bonum. Okay, so Dr. Jung had this intuition, but I don't know, did anybody else have this intuition? Did you have this intuition? Did anybody on the YouTube chat have an intuition that you were like an incarnation of Christ, or you carried Christ within you? Did you have that? Did you know that that's what the theologians were pointing to, or were they pointing to it?
No idea myself.
Yeah.
I mean, just to be honest with you, I had nothing about that. I just, I'm not sure. I think the primitive Christianity, they projected what was here outside themselves into objects.
And that's what we were taught right through the 20th century, as far as I know, and even now.
So we're taught that the projection, but we don't own the projection.
Right.
And we don't realize that. So that's kind of what I'm getting here. But
yeah,
no,
I mean, that's the point he made.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and the churches were only too happy to keep you thinking that you had to connect to God through them, when God was right here all the time. And because if you connected to God through the church, then they got the collection plate filled, presumably, and that's how these contemplative orders could.
Yeah, they were the mediator, whereas today we can be our own mediator. So
right, and so they were mediating between ourselves and us. And but now we can have enough knowledge to know that this is really stuff that's within us. Now, I understand that this is difficult material to understand, because I remember when I first read Ion, I got to chapter 5, which is Christ as a symbol of the self, and I sort of shut down. I just couldn't cope with that chapter. I'm saying, you're talking about the Son of God? How can you talk about God in that way? And so I had to put it down for about a decade before I could come back to it, while all the time studying other Jungian stuff, before I could understand what Dr. Jung was saying, that Christ is a symbol of the self, and what a symbol is even. And as many of you know, I'm currently reading this book, The Bible and the Psyche, Individuation, Symbolism, and in the Old Testament. Sorry, I have a mirror image here, so when I hold a book up, I get it backwards. So it's all symbolic, it turns out, but it's a hard idea to get your mind around when we've been brought up to believe that God is out in the stratosphere somewhere, and that the devil is also outside us. Well, no, the devil is in you. And you better learn how to deal with them.
I'm just checking in to see if you can hear me.
Yes,
yeah,
I can.
We're fine.
I've lost my camera, but I am here.
Oh, good. So, do you want to say something about that, or
No?
Nick?
Go. No, not really.
Okay, Nick, do you want to say something?
Yeah, the devil is in me. I know that.
Okay.
Just kidding, just kidding. Yeah, no, I got nothing to say. Yep, go ahead.
Okay. So Jung says this myth remained unassailably vital for a millennium until the first signs of a further transformation of consciousness began to appear in the 11th century. From then on, the symptoms of unrest and doubt increased until at the end of the second millennium, and he's talking about the year 2000 now, the outlines of a universal catastrophe became apparent, at first in the form of a threat to consciousness. This threat consists in giantism, in other words, a hubris of consciousness, in the assertion nothing is greater than man and his deeds. The otherworldliness, the transcendence of the Christian myth was lost, and with it the view that wholeness is achieved in the other world. In other words, when you die, you reconnect up with this unconscious being without being able to use the flow that comes from this, the self, throughout your life, which you should be able to do.
Yeah, that's where I disagree with that in terms of we can do it now and just contact the flow. We don't have to wait till we're dead. So, you know.
So I'm sorry, what are you disagreeing with? I'm not quite following.
That we can establish that contact. We don't have to be dead. You know what you just said about?
Yeah, so we can establish that contact.
Right, we can, and
if we understand what Dr. Jung was trying to say, but mostly people had, if you have the old way of teaching Christianity encrusted in your psyche for 30 or 40 years, it's pretty hard to come back to Jung and understand what the heck he was saying. Okay, which
I guess that's true. I didn't have that association of Christ being, associated with that because I wasn't brought up that way. But I just see it as a God, a force of God that comes through yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You can contact that.
Yeah, well, I never heard of Christ being a symbol of the self, and then the church got around to talking about imitatio Christi, which means imitation of Christ. And Jung wasn't talking about imitating Christ at all. He was talking about becoming Christ, experiencing being crucified. And if you're under 30, maybe you haven't been crucified, but most of us that are older certainly have been crucified in one way or another. And I don't mean literally in the Christian sense, but Nick, have you ever been crucified?
Like for the past couple of months, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
No, but I'm a bit reluctant to say like it was a crucifixion or what, because it makes it sound like Jesus or what. But yes, I've been through extremely like difficult times, more than difficult times, but yeah, crucifying times. Yeah.
Right. So you have a conflict of duties, perhaps, and it's hard to decide which way to go sometimes.
No, I mean, I would make the distinction between like really troubling times or difficult times, which is just for those I make the distinction between troubling difficult times and crucifixion, because troubling times are what all of us go through. It's just life. But
Right.
I think being crucified is it's a very specific kind of experience, and what comes to mind is the word annihilation. I don't really know how to describe it except that it feels like you are just smashing against yourself.
Right.
Where yourself does not just begin and end with yourself. So it's almost like it's designed a certain way such that all the polarities within yourself, instead of working in concert or being kind of separated, going about their own things, they are actually coming against each other.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I experienced this in, I mean, Dr. Jung in that letter to David Cox said that it's the experience of the four functions. So that's sensing and intuition, thinking and feeling. And so the way I experience being crucified in that sense is that when I'm, um, because I test 99th percentile on the intuitive side, I'm totally blind on the sensing side, okay, on the detail side. So I hate to get detail. And for me, I can see the end result of something instantly. I can hear the situation and I can know what the answer is. Like yesterday, when the Fed announced that they were going to drop the uh, transfer interest rate to zero, I said, that's going to do absolutely nothing. And the stock market is going to tank today. I even put it out on Twitter just to make sure that people saw that I said that before today. And what do we have? We have the biggest crash since 1987.
Yeah, and it's not a thinking kind of analysis thing, right? You just jot it and you just put it out
Yeah,
there.
I mean, as soon as Debbie told me what the headline it was, I said, they did what? you know, and I instantly knew that it wasn't going to work. And so my problem is if I then have to go back and dig out all the explanation of why it's not going to work, it's extremely painful for me. It's like being crucified. Um, and and
It requires a lot of energy to do that because
yeah,
that's not your, in other words, your basic intuition. You have an extroverted intuition.
well, introverted intuition, but
Well, INTP is a extroverted intuition.
oh,
You have introverted thinking, and that's why you think so well. I'm the opposite. I have an introverted intuition and an extroverted thinking, so that's the
okay,
difference. But anyway, what we're looking at is that what we're saying is there's a lot of tension in that because you were born to be more intuitive. Okay.
yeah,
And
absolutely,
that's your talent, strength.
sure,
Okay. You do it naturally.
right,
It's just like when I'm intuitive, it's just snap like that. You get it.
yeah.
But
I
then if you
mean,
have to go back and reconstruct it step by step, in the sensing function to see how you got there, that's what's difficult. And that's why
yeah,
I never did like to memorize things, for instance,
hmm
because I could
and
just call no point in it because I could always see what was going on. So,
right,
but there's a lot of tension there. And I think that's, you need to learn to do both, but
sure,
because you don't want to get too one-sided. And I think that's what Jung was saying. So it needs to be
right,
balanced out. But you've well developed your intuition. So
yeah, right. Nobody has to believe me on this, but back when the stock market was at 30,000, which was like what 3 weeks ago or something, um, I had this intuition that it was going to crash with no good reason to understand why it would crash. Okay, no intuition that it would be because of coronavirus, and um, you know, I also, and so I thought, oh my God, I should sell some puts, but I didn't do it because, you know, I said, I don't know. You know, I second guessed myself, but if I had sold puts, I would have made $100,000 in the last 3 weeks. And actually, that's how I put my daughters through college, is playing the options market, and it worked out pretty well. Okay, so Jeff says, he says, so Dr. Jung talks about Nephilim 2. He is a syncretist. That's what I like about him. I don't know what a syncretist is, and I don't care. Do you know what it is, Jerome? Have you ever heard of that? Or Nancy, do you know what a syncretist is? Or Nick?
No, I don't.
I don't, but if it comes from the word syncretism or it's related, then it's like syncretism is where you practice different things from different religions. So I guess it's related to the word syncretic. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't know what Nephilim is. Can they be more specific?
Yeah, Marie, can you tell us what Nephilim is? And so she says, in Gnosticism, there's something they called Christ consciousness. Being crucified means dying from your old self, and resurrection in the new you. It's like Phoenix rising from the ashes. I wish I can join the Zoom so I can share my thoughts too. Well, you're certainly welcome to join the Zoom next week. We're pretty much done for tonight.
Yeah,
but
the alchemist is what she's talking about there, is the old self, and
right.
the phoenix rising in the ashes, the new self, which is you're getting in contact with your true self.
Right. Well, you have an experience
which hasn't been born yet, really.
Right.
And so that's what's happening, is you get in touch with that. But you have to go through, as Nick says, you have to go through and burn all this stuff down to the ashes. It has to get down to the ashes.
So
and,
Jeff, go ahead.
And when that process approaches its completion, the inferior function comes to the rescue, so to speak.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So just throwing that in.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So Marie is going to a special school for esotericism, I think, or esoteric thought. And I don't know about Jeff, but Jeff says Christ consciousness is achieved through the opening of the 7 seals, activation of the 7 chakras through meditation. Okay, I don't know anything about that. And
yeah, that's correct. That's correct. I've done Kundalini yoga, so I know about the chakras, and the Kriya yoga from Asha Yogananda. So these are all the same thing you're talking about, and Dr. Jung's book on Kundalini yoga, he went through the different chakras, and what each level meant in terms of cleansing and going up, and then having it eventually gets to the heart chakra, which is the opening.
Right. Okay. So Marie also says the Nephilim are the giants that lived on Earth according to the biblical text.
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, we certainly have a few in our lives right now, actually. And they're about to be chopped down, I suspect. But anyway, okay. So we have gotten to where I'm going to say that we are at the end of the last full paragraph on page 328. And
we've done 1.5 pages.
Right, exactly. So Nancy, has this been helpful to you at all? Or you already grokked this.
Well, I've really learned a lot tonight.
You-
I'm very,
Oh, that's good.
yeah. So it's been good for me. And of course, I love this book.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that, you know, in terms of this group, this general group, it's worthwhile to go through this chapter in detail like we're doing, because it opens up so much else of what Dr. Jung, and Jerome's holding up the cover of the book right now. So
Yeah, that's the last thoughts thing. It's very dense, but
right.
it's. I think we do need to go through it paragraph by paragraph, because as you can see, our conversation expanded.
Yeah.
Just in 1.5 pages. So if people are interested in it, I would recommend.
Right. So I urge you to read it, but also I recommend that you get the audiobook because that'll give you an overview quickly of what it is without you having to spend your eyes on it. And then ultimately you have to go through it and put tabs in it and mark yours up. I certainly have marked mine up very thoroughly, and mine's literally falling apart, but it, you know, it gives us a basis for discussion. And so we will continue this from the beginning of the last paragraph on page 328, which is light is followed by shadow. And
Yeah, I appreciate Nick coming, and there's somebody
yeah,
else, Maria. I can't. I've got
Maria
this.
Venture.
I think she wants to join.
Yes. So Maria, I'll communicate with you separately. If anyone wants to be in the webinar group, please write to me at skip.conover@gmail.com, and I will be happy to include you. And there's no big rules. As long as your people are respectful in the group, then we're all good. Where I did block someone from my YouTube channel today because of disrespect, and I reserve the right to do that. But I haven't seen any of that tonight, thank goodness. So, so next week we will go on with this chapter, and on Wednesday we're in the advanced reading group. Again, if you're interested in the advanced reading group, please write to me at skip.conover@gmail.com, and we'll arrange for that. And so Wednesday, we have a continuation of Tim Holmes's numinous experience for about an hour. And then we're going to be discussing with Mertz Oliveira, who's our Brazilian member. We're going to be discussing Nisa, the
Severio.
Nisa da Silveira,
Right.
who, and a movie about her entitled The Heart of Madness. Okay, and she was a Jungian analyst, an early Jungian analyst who brought Jungian psychology into Latin America, not only to Brazil, but throughout Latin America. And so that movie, The Heart of Madness, Nisa, The Heart of Madness, is a very powerful movie. You have to read the subtitles, but it's very, very interesting movie. And Tim, it involves Nisa de Silveira starting to gain access to her actually mad patients. Some of them were actually mad, and some of them were misabused. And so she got them painting and so on. And so Tim, who's an outstanding artist, is going to also comment on the movie. Did you see it, Jerome?
I haven't seen it. I've seen all the other films and things. There's a number of films about Nisi on the thing, but yeah, she worked in a psychiatric hospital in Brazil, and then she got kicked out because, you know, she wouldn't subscribe to electrotherapy of
Right.
patients, and she refused to do it. And then she was a psychiatrist, MD.
Yes.
Was her training. One of the few women that first got in Brazil that went through the program.
Right.
And then she used Jungian concepts and got these schizophrenic people to really do some nice Mandela paintings. So,
yeah, fantastic paintings.
And yeah, and
Wow.
it's very interesting. So if you're interested in that, is what we're talking about here is making contact, and they had the contact, and they were able to bring that forward.
Right. So for those of you who don't know the advanced reading group, we have done 32 sessions on ion and 45 sessions of Mysterium Conjunctionis. These are all in a special Dropbox only for the advanced reading group. And so if you want access to all that information, you're welcome to join us. And right now we're going through volume 15 of the collected works, which is this book, The Spirit in Man, Art, and Literature. And one of our members, Tim Holmes, had an incredible numinous experience about 10 days ago or 8 days ago. And so he started to describe it on last Wednesday, and we hope to finish it this Wednesday. So it'll be an interesting conversation. So are you still there, Nancy?
I'm here. I would like to say about the movie that it's really an amazing movie.
It is, yeah.
One of the things I liked was to see a woman stand her ground.
Absolutely.
And insist on what was right. There are some disturbing scenes, so you have to be prepared. But
right.
The overall movie is worth watching very much.
Yeah. And so if you're interested in these Jungian topics, you need to get into it, I'm afraid. But anyway, I'll look forward to talking to you. Now, I am doing every day at 4:30, I'm doing readings of this book, the Bible and the Psyche. And so tomorrow I will be working on chapter 5, which is Moses and Yahweh and the Exodus. And so if you want to join me at 4:30 tomorrow afternoon, I'll be reading. That will not be a panel session because the reading is intended to be a reading. But I do respond to chats at least at the end of the reading if you want to chat after the reading. So I guess that's it. See you tomorrow. See you Wednesday.
Hey, thanks.
Thanks, Jerome.
Thanks.
Bye, Nancy.
Thanks, Nick. Bye, Nancy.
Yeah,
Bye.
Marie, write to me and we'll get you on the panel for next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.